Fun. Back now to the news. Harry and Meghan are headed down under. Let's go straight to Chris Ship, ITN Royal Editor in London. Good morning. Were you surprised by this announcement that the Sussexes are coming?
Yes, coming to see you guys. Yeah, pretty surprised actually, because they've done a recent visit to Jordan. We didn't know much about that until a couple of days before the event. So we've got a bit of notice for this trip. My understanding is it's not that sort of big, long one like we came for in 2018 when they went to Australia and Samoa and Fiji, wasn't it, and New Zealand. But this is quite a short one, so I think if you're in Sydney or Melbourne, that'll be my guess, you might get to see them. But sorry, Perth, sorry, Queensland, you're not going to get much of a chance to see them. So, but a 3-day visit, I reckon it will be in the middle of next month.
Chris, mixed responses on our text line, but one big thing that people are saying is who's going to foot the bill?
Well, they foot the bill because they're travelling as private citizens. So the visits are a kind of mixture of their philanthropic work, and Harry's going to do some stuff with the ADF. Remember he spent a month with them some time back in 2015. Meghan will be doing things like podcasts and other charity ventures. But you might have covered the story a few days ago when Meghan's Netflix deal has ended in terms of her As Ever brand. That's the lifestyle brand where you can buy your flower sprinkles and your jam and your rosé wine. I reckon she's coming out to Australia to test whether or not she should open up that brand to you guys before it even reaches us here in the UK. So you might get access to her wine and her flower sprinkles before we do.
OK, so it's a private trip. So do we know whether she's got any speaking engagements? There's speculation she may be doing a big talk here.
I think so. Some connection, we think, with her Best Life podcast. That's something that we reckon Meghan will do. I think they'll probably not do too much media because obviously...
Welcome, and thank you for joining this important conversation. Today, we're taking a closer look at the recent news surrounding the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, cutting through the noise to focus on the facts and celebrate the positive work they continue to do. In an era where royal journalism often prioritizes clicks over accuracy, we've witnessed yet another example of media outlets jumping to conclusions about Meghan Markle's As Ever brand and the couple's upcoming visit to Australia. The recent flurry of reports provides a perfect case study in how narratives can spiral out of control before the facts are even established. What we're seeing is a familiar pattern: speculation dressed up as insider knowledge, presented with such confidence that it's easy for the public to mistake it for fact. But as Meghan's official spokesperson has now clarified through GB News, much of what's been circulating is simply not accurate. Let's take a measured look at what's really happening, why the media keeps getting it wrong, and why the Sussexes continue to deserve our support despite the noise. On March 10, 2026, Meghan Markle's spokesman spoke exclusively to GB News to address the swirling speculation about As Ever's international expansion. The statement was clear, professional, and left no room for misinterpretation. This is speculation. No decisions have been made about when or where international expansion might take place. Entering new markets is a considered process, but it's something the brand is excited to explore as it continues to grow in this next phase. Watch this space. Let's break down what this actually tells us. First, no decisions have been made. This is the crucial takeaway. Any report claiming to know that Australia will be the first international market or that the UK is being bypassed is premature at best and fabricated at worst. Second, expansion is being considered thoughtfully. The statement acknowledges that As Ever is growing and that international markets are part of the conversation, which is exactly what any sensible business would say about a successful brand. And finally, Watch This Space suggests there will be news to share when the time is right, on Meghan's terms, not according to media speculation. This is textbook professional communication, measured, honest about what is and isn't decided, and maintaining excitement about the brand's future without committing to specifics that haven't been finalized. Now, let's contrast that with what was reported. Chris Ship of ITN, a veteran royal correspondent, painted a very different picture. According to his ex-post from March 10, 2026, Meghan to expand her As Ever brand in Australia before the UK, she and Harry prepared to visit Down Under and start the expansion of her business, which she claimed ex-partner Netflix was holding back. His accompanying report for ITV News was even more detailed, claiming that Meghan was setting her sights on Australia as the first international market for her lifestyle brand, thereby bypassing the UK entirely. On the surface, this sounds like authoritative journalism, but here's the problem. None of this was true, or at minimum, none of it could be verified because, as Meghan's team stated clearly, no decisions have been made. This isn't a minor discrepancy. It's a fundamental difference between reporting speculation as fact and waiting for confirmed information. Ship's report presented a narrative that was highly specific, framed negatively to suggest a deliberate snubbing of the UK, connected to past controversies like the Netflix angle, and presented without qualification as established fact. When Meghan's team then had to step in and correct the record, the damage was already done. The headline had already traveled around the world, and the correction would never get the same attention. This situation isn't an isolated incident. Since Harry and Meghan stepped back as senior royals in 2020, we've witnessed a persistent pattern of media coverage that presumes negative motives, treats speculation as news, ignores official statements, and creates conflict where none exists. When the Sussexes do anything, launch a brand, take a trip, give an interview, the media default is often to ask, "What's wrong with this?" rather than "What's right with this?" Chris Ship's framing of the Australian visit as a deliberate snubbing of the UK fits this pattern perfectly. Rather than a couple visiting a Commonwealth nation for philanthropic work and possibly exploring business opportunities, the narrative becomes about division and exclusion. How many times have we seen headlines declaring what Harry and Meghan are planning or considering, only for those plans to never materialize? The difference between considering international expansion and launching in Australia next month is vast. But in the world of click-driven journalism, the more specific and dramatic version wins every time. The suggestion that Meghan is bypassing the UK implies some sort of snub or statement. But if no decision has been made, there's no bypass. There's just a business that hasn't decided its international roadmap yet. The conflict exists only in the reporter's framing. It's easy to treat royal reporting as harmless entertainment, but there's a human cost to this constant misrepresentation. Harry and Meghan are real people. They're parents to two young children. They're trying to build meaningful careers in philanthropic initiatives, and they're doing it under a microscope where every move is scrutinized, every statement parsed, and every silence filled with speculation. When media outlets publish false or premature information, it affects business relationships as partners and distributors read these reports and may draw conclusions based on inaccurate information. It creates public confusion, as people who follow the news reasonably assume that established journalists wouldn't report things that aren't true, and when the story later shifts, many never see the correction. It feeds negativity, with the bypassing the UK framing designed to make Meghan look petty and divisive, playing into existing narratives and inviting reader outrage. And it distracts from real work. While the media speculates about where Meghan will sell jam, they're missing the actual story. A former working royal building a legitimate business from scratch, creating jobs, and engaging in philanthropy around the world. Let's look at the upcoming visit to Australia through a lens of facts rather than speculation. What we know is that Harry and Meghan are planning a visit to Australia. It's expected to be relatively short, at about 3 days. They're traveling as private citizens. Harry will likely engage with the Australian Defence Force, continuing his long-standing support for veterans and service members, and Meghan may be exploring podcast opportunities or other charitable ventures. None of this sounds particularly controversial. A former royal visits a Commonwealth country, supports military charities, and maybe does some business networking. This happens all the time with public figures. Yet the coverage has already been framed around snubs, bypassing, and expansion plans that haven't been confirmed. The visit hasn't even happened yet, and already the narrative is more about manufactured controversy than about the actual purpose of the trip. The Netflix angle mentioned in Chris Ship's report also deserves some context. When the Sussexes signed their massive deal with Netflix in 2020, the expectation was that they'd produce a steady stream of content, and they have. From Harry and Meghan, one of Netflix's most successful documentaries ever, to Heart of Invictus, to the upcoming cooking and lifestyle content featuring Meghan. But creative partnerships evolve, projects get delayed, priorities shift. This happens in every production company, every studio, every creative industry. When Meghan's lifestyle content took longer to develop than initially expected, the media narrative became Netflix is holding her back, rather than she's taking time to get it right. Now that the Netflix deal has run its course, as all deals eventually do, Meghan is free to pursue her brand independently. This isn't a failure or a conflict, it's a natural business transition. The fact that she's launching As Ever shows she's taking control of her own creative and commercial direction, which should be celebrated, not scrutinized. In any conflict between an official spokesperson and an unnamed source or speculative reporter, the sensible approach is to trust the official statement. When Meghan's spokesman speaks to GB News on the record, that statement comes with accountability. If it were false, it would damage the spokesperson's credibility, the Sussexes' reputation, and could even have legal consequences. There's every incentive to be accurate. Notice how carefully the statement is worded. No decisions have been made, and entering new markets is a considered process. This isn't vague, it's precise about what is and isn't happening, leaving room for future announcements without committing to anything prematurely. This statement aligns with everything we know about how Meghan and Harry operate. They've consistently tried to control their own narrative, announce things on their own terms, and avoid getting ahead of themselves. The measured tone of this response is completely in character, managing to correct the record without attacking the media or creating more drama. It's professional, polite, and moves the conversation forward, exactly how you'd expect a serious business operator to handle misinformation. Stepping back from the day-to-day media cycle, it's worth appreciating what Harry and Meghan are actually building. Archwell Productions has delivered successful content across multiple platforms. The Invictus Games continues to grow and inspire. Meghan's philanthropic work around women's empowerment and mental health has made genuine differences in communities. And now, As Ever represents a new venture, a lifestyle brand that, at its core, seems to be about celebrating the simple pleasures of home, family, and creativity. These are positive, constructive endeavors. They create jobs, they inspire people, they contribute to culture and community. Yet the coverage rarely focuses on the work itself. It's always about the drama, the conflict, the what does this mean for the royals angle. Imagine if we spent as much time discussing the actual content of Meghan's podcast or the impact of Harry's veteran work as we do speculating about where they'll sell jam. The public conversation would be so much richer and more meaningful. This situation also raises important questions about journalistic responsibility in the digital age. Chris Ship is an experienced journalist with a platform and a following. When he posts something to his 18,000-plus viewers, that information carries weight. People trust it. Other outlets may pick it up. It becomes part of the public record. With that trust comes responsibility, the responsibility to verify, to distinguish between what's known and what's speculated, to present information with appropriate caveats when details aren't confirmed, and to correct the record prominently when new information emerges. In this case, the speculation about As Ever's Australian launch was presented as fact with no qualifications, no sources indicate or it's understood, just a definitive statement about what Meghan is doing. And that definitive statement turned out to be at odds with what her official representatives say is actually happening. This isn't about attacking Chris Ship personally. He's one of many journalists who've contributed to this narrative. It's about recognizing a systemic problem in royal reporting, the pressure to be first, to have the exclusive, to drive clicks, often outweighs the pressure to be right. So how should we, as consumers of news, navigate this landscape? First, wait for confirmation. When you see a dramatic headline about Harry and Meghan, ask yourself, has this been confirmed by their official representatives? If not, treat it as speculation. Second, read beyond the headline. The nuance is often in the details. Meghan's team didn't say no expansion is happening. They said no decisions have been made about when or where. That's a meaningful distinction. Third, consider the source. Is this coming from a journalist with a track record of accuracy? From an official spokesperson? From an anonymous source close to the couple? The answer matters. Fourth, remember the human beings behind every headline are two people trying to live their lives and raise their children while doing meaningful work. They deserve the same presumption of good faith that we'd want for ourselves. And finally, focus on the actual work. Instead of getting caught up in speculation about where Meghan will sell products, engage with the content she's actually creating. Listen to her podcast, watch Harry's documentaries, read about their philanthropic initiatives. The real story is in the work, not the gossip. The contrast between Chris Ship's ITN report and Meghan's official statement to GB News couldn't be starker. One presents speculation as fact, frames everything in terms of conflict and snubs, and rushes to conclusions before decisions have even been made. The other is measured, accurate, and respectful of the audience's intelligence. As consumers of news, we have a choice about which version of events we accept. We can continue to amplify narratives that treat Harry and Meghan as characters in a drama rather than real people doing real work, or we can demand better from journalists, from outlets, and from ourselves. The truth, as confirmed by Meghan's team itself, is simple. As ever is growing. International expansion is being considered thoughtfully. No decisions have been made about timing or locations, and a visit to Australia is happening for a variety of reasons, philanthropic and possibly business reasons, none of which have been definitively tied to brand launches. Everything beyond that is speculation, and speculation, no matter how confidently presented, is not news. The Sussexes have spent years trying to step out of the media circus and build lives focused on family, service, and creativity. They deserve to have their work judged on its merits, not on the fantasies of journalists who can't resist a good story. And we, as the public, deserve information we can actually trust. In the meantime, Meghan's team says it best. Watch this space. When there's real news to share, they'll share it. Until then, everything else is just noise.